Hello and welcome to another video in this writing feedback series on closely observed English. And here we have a C1 advanced essay task. This is a repeat task. So the candidate who sent me his work earlier, his or her, I'm not sure, they sent their work earlier. I reviewed it and they re-attempted the task. So let's see if the feedback that they received helped. So this was a discussion on climate change, and we have the rubric at the top here. You need to choose 2 of the 3 points here to discuss, and then you have to say which of the 2 that you've chosen would be more effective, giving reasons. So here we go, climate change. Over the past years, the media have frequently carried reports of climate changes. This is a proof that one of the main challenges which must be met is linked to the reduction of CO2 emissions in the atmosphere. I'm convinced that the first step to be taken should have place in people's minds. Everyone should be more aware of the global warming and understand that it is indirectly a consequence of everyday activities. Climate changes are related to methods of energy production. We need to burn fossil fuels to produce electricity and to get our cars moving. This process contributes a lot to global warming. For this reason, people should learn how to live reducing CO2 emissions using the public transports when it is possible, avoiding waste of energy and investing in energy independence. But to make that happen, it is necessary that people understand that everyone must do his own part to reduce global warming because this issue is linked to every single person. On the other hand, many people think that the most important part of this process could be done by governments introducing new laws to protect our planet. According to them, governments should enact laws making every step of energy production eco-friendly, encouraging the use of renewable energy sources. All things considered, it should not be forgotten that renewable sources are not efficient as fossil fuels at the moment, so the only way to reduce CO2 emissions in the atmosphere is reducing energy need. To do this, laws are not enough. Everyone should do his own part. Right, okay. So let's take a look at the content first. Now, compared to last time when the content was kind of drifting away from where it should be, this is not too bad, but there is still a bit of an issue. We have mention of the legislation aspect, we've got mention of the education aspect. But when you look at things like this last part, to do this, laws are not enough, everyone should do his own part. Yeah, absolutely. But which of those 2 is that? Is it education? Is it legislation? Well, it's not clear. Maybe it's almost as if I'm looking at this paragraph, I start to believe it might be. It could be if the problem here that the student has kind of drifted away from the idea of educating people about climate change to being more like people need to just be aware of what they're doing and to take responsibility, which would be a different point. That's the point of personal responsibility. So I would say that we're looking at somewhere between a 3 and a 4 for this. I'm going to be generous and go for a 4. I think this paragraph, the long paragraph just here, needs tidying up, and we need to be really centered on just this idea of education and the impact of educating people about climate change, not to talk about well, for example, here we're talking about methods of energy production. I myself care very much about the climate, but I don't think that I'm in a position to do much about energy production, no matter how much education I receive. I might start to protest if there's another coal-fired power plant that's planned to be open somewhere soon. I might be proactively pushing for solar panel technology, but talking about energy production here and that side of things doesn't seem really connected to the point of education. So I would say that takes away from the content a little bit. Now, in terms of communicative achievement, let's think, well, the essay has an introduction, it has its conclusion where we know for certain, well, do we? Well, there is an attempt at least to say which of the 2 points is more important, which is what you expect in an essay. Each point is introduced and developed, not always perfectly well, but not too bad. And by and large, I would say that the language used is of the right register. So that sets us up for a nice solid 3, which is okay. Now, in terms of organization, the text itself is organized reasonably well. The long paragraph here kind of unbalances the overall text. If this had been shorter, and it could have been if we get rid of the energy production stuff and concentrate just on the idea of educating people, that paragraph could have been a lot shorter, and the next one would then have been able to, you could have developed the answer a little bit more. It's interesting that in the whole paragraph that you're talking about education, I don't see any mention of school. It doesn't say the word school there, does it? No. So yeah, you're right. To make that happen, it is necessary that people understand that everyone must do his own part to reduce global warming. Great. Tell me how you would do that in education. What you're doing here is you're adding a point that's true, but it's not really relevant to what's going on there. And that's kind of an organizational issue, as well as it being content, communicative, everything like that. Now, there's a slightly larger problem with organization in the text. It's a problem that happens a couple of times. And I want you to have a look at the first sentence as an example. Over the past years, the media have frequently carried reports of climate changes. This is a proof that one of the main challenges, which blah, blah, blah. Okay. Now, generally speaking, we could divide all clauses into two. And depending on the terminology you choose to follow, you could maybe call them independent clauses and dependent clauses. And from that kind of overarching idea, we can then filter down into others, sub clauses and things like that. Now, independent clauses can stand alone as a sentence. And if we have a look at the first two sentences here, the first one is independent. You could put a full stop there. The second one is also independent. So there could be a full stop here where in fact we have a comma. So what happens then? Well, in terms of organization for the exams, the examiners will be looking at the clauses. If you have an independent clause and an independent clause, they need to be glued together by a conjunction, even as simple as and. And it's an issue that reoccurs a few times in this text. So be careful about clauses. If they are dependent clauses that can't stand alone as a sentence, then they can just be tacked on to the end of an independent clause using a comma, for example. So for example, just here, to make that happen, that's not enough to be a sentence. It's obviously going to be dependent on the sentence around it. So it goes with the rest, just with commas. That's all you need. Okay, so a little bit of research there would be useful so you can see exactly what's going on there. So in terms of organization, generally it's okay. Like I say, it's a little bit unbalanced. There are times where it kind of veers off in the thinking, so it loses its coherence. So I'm going to go for a 2 for that. And then that brings us to the language. And I would say that the language has improved over the previous attempt, but not sufficiently to warrant a 3 over the past years. Over the past how many years? Maybe in past years or recently. We've got reports of climate changes. So you can either say climate change, which is given in the rubric. I think I discussed this point last time, or you could say changes to the climate. There are some nice bits of language, like the main challenges which must be met is linked to the reduction of CO2 emissions in the atmosphere. But then we have these little mistakes that could be slips, I don't know. But for example, to make that happens, it should be to make that happen. So it should be the full verb rather than the third person singular. We yeah, in terms of the way that the point is made, there are better ways of saying it. So, for example, it's necessary that people understand that everyone must do his own part to reduce global warming because this issue is linked to every single person. It's a little bit cyclical. Don't you think? It kind of returns back to where it started without necessarily developing the point, which is a bit of a language problem, a bit of an organizational problem. You see that the problems in writing go across the board, don't they? So I would give it a 2, but it's moving in the right direction. There's enough in here to be, to start thinking positively. So what we're looking at overall then is an essay that comes close to the mark. We're looking at maybe 4, 3, 2, 2. So we just need to bring things up a little bit higher. And again, we could come back to the idea of boosting the content mark. If you choose education and legislation in the context of this essay, make sure you stick to it and don't start talking about personal responsibility. That's a different point, and it's not to do with education or legislation. You could say that we need to educate people on the topic of personal responsibility, and that schools don't do enough about this, that they're too interested in teaching maths and literature and things like that without maybe looking at ethics and the ethics of being an individual in a community. You could develop that point, certainly, but just saying that we need to have more responsibility for our own actions, that's not developing the point you've chosen. I mean, I agree with you that we need this sort of responsibility, but it's not connected to the task as you've chosen it. And that's what brings you down a bit here. And in the final analysis, it's the one thing that really kind of takes this away from being just about a pass. So there we go. What have we learned? Well, we've learned that if you take on board some feedback and then reattempt the same task, then you've got a good chance of doing better. Now, of course, that's not going to help you in the exam. You're not going to get to do the task twice. But one thing that I'd like this student to do would be to look at the first attempt, look at the second attempt, and see where the similarities and differences lay. They can watch the videos again if they want to. By analysing it, by reflecting on their performance in the writing task, they'll be able to take on board better lessons and start to think how they can really push everything forwards. So until next time, thank you all very much. Goodbye.